The issue of immigration in America has long been a contentious one, but under the Trump administration, it took on a new, alarming dimension. The former president's rhetoric and policies, particularly those surrounding immigration, have left many immigrants, especially Latinos, questioning their future in this country. What was once considered an abstract political debate has now become a living nightmare for millions of undocumented workers and their families. In recent weeks, the Trump campaign and its supporters have been vocal about their intentions to once again target immigrants in a way that can only be described as mass deportations on an unprecedented scale. The rhetoric has grown increasingly severe, with Trump himself and his closest allies in the media and government laying out a blueprint for an aggressive, no-holds-barred approach to immigration enforcement. As the campaign season heats up, Trump's allies are promising to deport millions of undocumented immigrants, including those who have lived and worked in the U.S. for years. But what does this mean for Latino voters, particularly those who once supported Donald Trump? Are they truly aware of the scale of the deportations that Trump is advocating for? And why are some still willing to back a president whose policies directly threaten their communities? In this video, we'll delve deep into the shocking realities of Trump's mass deportation plan and the painful contradictions among Latino voters who still stand by him. Trump's deportation blueprint. What we know so far. It is no secret that Donald Trump made immigration the cornerstone of his political brand. From his infamous remarks about Mexican immigrants during his campaign launch in 2015 to his administration's cruel and inhumane separation of families at the border, Trump's hardline stance on immigration has been a defining feature of his political legacy. However, as we move into the 2024 election cycle, the scale and severity of his promises seem to be escalating. Fox News' Jesse Watters, a key voice in Trump's media ecosystem, recently painted a chilling picture of what life could be like under Trump's proposed immigration policies. In a disturbing segment, Watters described the process of deportation in graphic detail, essentially warning migrants that if Trump wins, they should expect the full weight of ICE, immigration and customs enforcement, to come for them. Watters' rhetoric implied that even those who have been working in the U.S. for years, paying taxes, and contributing to the economy would be subjected to brutal raids and deportations. According to Watters, it wouldn't matter if you had a job, a family, or a history of contributing to American society. If you were an undocumented immigrant, you would face the wrath of the government under Trump's plan. ICE is coming for you, Watters ominously declared. This rhetoric is a stark reminder of the policies that Trump has been advocating for in his bid for re-election. In line with this, Trump's former ICE director, Tom Homan, has made it clear that if certain sanctuary cities or states refuse to cooperate with federal immigration authorities, Trump's administration would not hesitate to use aggressive tactics to force compliance. He warned that local officials could face severe consequences, including criminal charges, if they obstructed federal deportation efforts. This means that churches, schools, and even families who may try to offer shelter or support to undocumented immigrants could find themselves in direct conflict with the Trump administration's laws. What's particularly concerning is that Trump's campaign is framing this as a moral duty, an obligation to uphold the law, no matter the human cost. Homan has gone as far as to say that deporting non-criminal migrants is also on the table, stressing that anyone in the U.S. illegally, even those without criminal records, should be prepared to face deportation. The military on the streets. A dystopian future? Perhaps the most alarming element of Trump's proposed mass deportation plan is the use of military force to carry out his agenda. Rand Paul, a Republican senator who has historically prided himself on being a defender of civil liberties, raised a significant concern about the militarization of immigration enforcement. Paul made it clear that he would strongly oppose the idea of sending U.S. military personnel into American cities to conduct deportation raids. The image of military soldiers patrolling neighborhoods to round up immigrants is one that many would have thought unthinkable just a few years ago. But under Trump's rhetoric and the plans outlined by figures like Homan, it's becoming a very real possibility. If the Trump administration has its way, we could see a scenario where military personnel, rather than local law enforcement, are tasked with enforcing immigration laws. This vision of a militarized America should send chills down the spine of any citizen who values the sanctity of civil liberties and the proper role of the military. The idea of armed soldiers conducting door-to-door raids is nothing short of dystopian, and it's a concept that seems to be gaining traction among Trump's closest allies. Latino voters for Trump, a contradiction exposed. Despite the alarming nature of Trump's deportation plans, there remains a significant segment of the Latino community that continues to support him. In a recent interview with a Latino Trump supporter, the man, who had entered the U.S. legally but had overstayed his visa, stated that he would accept deportation if it were ordered. He expressed that, as an immigrant, he understood the consequences of violating immigration laws, and if the government decided to send him back, he would understand. This sentiment is baffling, especially when considering the broader context. Migrants, many of whom are Latino, play an integral role in the U.S. economy. They work in fields, construction, restaurants, and countless other industries that keep the country running. Trump's mass deportation plans would devastate entire sectors of the economy, particularly agriculture and construction. Yet, some Latino voters seem willing to overlook the potential destruction of their own communities in support of Trump's harsh stance on immigration. But there's a crucial irony here. Many of the Latino voters who support Trump have benefited directly from the very immigrant workforce that he seeks to deport. Farmers across the country, particularly those in rural areas, voted for Trump in large numbers despite his promise to deport the very people who keep their operations afloat. These voters are now facing the reality of what mass deportations would mean: labor shortages, economic instability, and the breakdown of entire industries that rely heavily on immigrant labor. It's a tragic irony that some Latino voters are still backing Trump, even when his policies stand in direct opposition to their best interests. This has led many to question how these voters reconcile their support for Trump with the very real consequences of his immigration agenda. The growing fear among immigrant communities. The immigrant community, especially in battleground states like Wisconsin, is gripped by fear. Take the example of Fernanda Jimenez, a young woman who has lived in the U.S. since she was 5 years old. A recipient of DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, Jimenez is now terrified that Trump's re-election would mean the end of her dreams of becoming a lawyer. She, along with thousands of other DACA recipients, faces the looming threat of deportation if Trump follows through on his plan to dismantle the program. In cities like Springfield, Ohio, Haitian immigrants who helped revitalize the local economy are now fleeing in fear of deportation. These immigrants have worked tirelessly in factories, contributing to the economic rebirth of Springfield. However, with the Trump administration threatening to strip them of their temporary protected status, TPS, these individuals are now faced with the prospect of returning to a country they barely recognize. This mass exodus is not just a human tragedy, it is also an economic one. Communities that once thrived thanks to immigrant labor are now at risk of being decimated. And yet, Trump supporters, including many farmers and small business owners, continue to back him, oblivious to the damage his policies would inflict on their own livelihoods. Latino support for Trump, a divisive issue. As the 2024 election looms, the question remains: will Latino voters continue to support Trump despite the devastating implications of his mass deportation plans? In interviews, Trump supporters often cite his strong stance on immigration as a reason for their loyalty. They argue that America must uphold its laws and prioritize legal immigration. Yet, when confronted with the reality of Trump's policies that would tear apart families, rip away workers from essential industries, and cause widespread economic disruption, their support becomes harder to justify. Latino voters, like all Americans, must decide if they are willing to accept the pain and suffering that Trump's policies would bring to their communities. It's one thing to support a candidate on issues like the economy or national security, but it's another to stand by a leader who seeks to decimate the very communities that contribute to the nation's prosperity. Conclusion: Trump's mass deportation plan is no longer a distant threat. It is a real and present danger for millions of undocumented immigrants living in the United States. His rhetoric, backed by a dangerous coalition of his media allies and hardline supporters, paints a grim future for Latino families who have made America their home. The harsh reality is that Trump's policies could strip away the lives that many immigrants have built over the years, leaving devastation in their wake. What is perhaps most perplexing is the continued support for Trump among certain segments of the Latino population, despite the harm his policies would cause. The contradiction is glaring. How can you support a man whose policies threaten the very existence of your community? It's a question that Latino voters must grapple with as the 2024 election approaches.